Hello everybody and welcome to this online presentation of the cost-benefit analysis of idrt in scalp defects. So this analysis is based on an article published in Aesthetic Plastic Surgery by Schiavon in 2016. Let me introduce our team to you. We're from the market access team. This team is aiming at several missions, from communication to reimbursement and pricing or scenario monitoring. But generally speaking, what we try to do is to address the needs of one new stakeholders that is taking an increasing role in health decision making, is the payer. If physicians are very important to convince somebody to use one or another therapeutic options, payers are taking more and more weight in the decision-making process. So this is why market access is dedicating effort to. And this exercise and analysis is trying to develop something that is beyond the clinical benefits of idrt and trying to balance cost and health benefits. So first, what is exactly the cost-benefit analysis? Is in order to compare two different treatment alternatives with a same standard and to balance both clinical outcomes and total costs. In more common saying of common language, this would be like the best value for money. That is what we try to determine with a cost-benefit analysis. So to put the frame of what has been subject in this analysis, so this analysis is regarding scalp defect, full thickness scalp defect in the calvaria. The technology that is, or the medical device that is studied is idrt bilayer, and it is compared to flap surgery. What is studied is the cost benefit, which includes all the inpatient and outpatient stays and surgery costs. And in the other side, in terms of clinical outcome, what has been studied is the closure type and duration. And as other details of the study, it's a single center study. It's a retrospective analysis, which means there are less bias maybe. And the study is based on the hospital algorithm. So once again, the point of the bias is very important because you just respect what happens in this center, and based on that, Schiavon analyzed the health outcome and the total costs. So as we go in the analysis, it's important to define first and foremost what is the standard of care. The standard of care is a term that is used in a lot of contexts and sometimes with some misunderstanding. So the definition we state is the treatment that would be used by a given physician in a given setting with a given patient. It has to be commonly validated in one hospital or one region or one country, that if this type of patient with this type of wound would go to a given center, every physician would do exactly the same. So in the center that is mentioned is in the study, they defined a clinical algorithm to determine what is the treatment alternative they will use for a patient or for another. The main options are skin expansion, flap, skin graft, and or idrt. As you can see, the criteria to apply idrt or flap is whether there is periosteum or not. If there is periosteum, the flap will be preferred, and if there is no periosteum left, the idrt would be applied. And Schiavon just retrospectively analyzed all those data from those patients selected based on this algorithm. So this study has been made on a group of 35 patients. 17 were treated with idrt and 18 received the flap. The issue or maybe complexity of the scalp defect, it's a very broad indication with very different type of wounds. And if some wounds were below 2 square centimeters, some were higher than 100 square centimeters. So it's kind of difficult to compare such data. That is why Schiavon decided to do a subgroup analysis. So that's what we will call the subgroup, or the more severe cases, because they had a skin defect larger than 100 square centimeters. So they received very much higher surgery. This also explains why the average cost per patient rose from roughly 10,000 euros to almost 18,000 euros per patient for the total duration of the stay. The financial costs are based on the cost structure of the hospital, which means the cost of the OR has been set up or analyzed based on the hospital data. So it's real life, real cost, and real data. So what does the total cost analysis show us? It's important to state that we are in a cost-benefit analysis. So first we take a look at the cost, and then we will see the clinical benefits in order to do the whole comparison. So in the total group, you can see that the medium flap cost is more than 7,000 euros, which is lower than the medium idrt cost of roughly 11,000 euros. This is a difference, but this difference is not statistically significant. It is exactly the same that we do with clinical outcome. Every time there is a difference between two arms, we try to see if this difference is statistically significant, and in this case, it's not true. So we can say that they are in similar ranges of costs, but we cannot conclude further. In the idrt group, we can see that the costs are almost halved in the idrt group, 11,800 euros versus more than 23,000 euros for the flap group, which means that the situation is completely the opposite, maybe because it's longer surgeries for flaps and it requires much longer stays or longer OR time. At the end, what happens is it's a very small group. It's only 11 patients, so we cannot perform statistical analysis, and we cannot conclude to any statistically significant difference. So we just have a trend that tend to show that idrt has a much lower total cost than flaps for severe cases. One point I would like to highlight in this slide is the split between the different cost type. So you can see that, for example, outpatient cost is a very low part of the total cost, and what takes the most part of it is the hospital stay. It's not necessarily the surgery, even though the surgery cost is almost double between idrt and flap, which can also explain the time of the operation. And in this total cost, it's interesting to know what is the real weight of idrt in this total cost of the stay. And here you can see that from those more than 11,000 euros, idrt has cost less than 2,000 euros. So idrt is below 20% of the total cost. And generally speaking, from one hospital stay, we receive in the country that use DRG a given amount of money. And as a rule of thumb, the purchase of medical device should always be below 30% of this total amount. So idrt price being below 20% of the total cost is quite a positive signal and quite a positive message to send and say, okay, it's a very good technology that is not going to impact that much the total stay, because the total stay and the potential complications are the ones that are really driving the cost up. And So we have seen all the cost part, and now we try to see the benefit part. In the paper, the closure duration and the closure type were very similar in both groups. So this is why in the total group analysis, as we have good clinical outcomes and ranges of costs that are pretty similar or with no statistically significant difference, we can conclude that idrt is an additional option and can be used as you seen in this center as part of an algorithm and be used for a given patient in a given situation. And it's important to state that it does not lead to significant additional expenditure, that sometimes it's is a perception that is present outside. And in the subgroup of the severe cases, what happens? The clinical outcomes are the same, the duration and type of closure are pretty similar in both arms, but you have that some costs that are halved compared to the flap for the idrt group, which tend, as a cost-benefit analysis, to balance more in favor of idrt, and leading to the conclusion that it presents a better cost-benefit ratio than flaps. It's only a trend because we cannot conclude anything due to the small sample size. And as a conclusions of this analysis, of course, the number one conclusion is we would love to have a larger number of patients in those kind of cost-benefit analysis to be able to perform statistical analysis and to be able to get stronger conclusions. It is very important to show that idrt is a very good clinical option. We know it from all the literature, but also with a favorable cost-benefit profile. So this is a strong point of Schiavon in this paper. And it would be good to have a bigger sample, but also a bigger or longer time of follow-up, because this study is only until discharge. So it cannot help us very well to say what could be the rate of explantation or infections that can also be very strong cost drivers. So it would be good to confirm this favorable trend, especially in severe cases, on a longer-term follow-up. So thank you very much for this, for your time, and you have access to this presentation in the app, and you can use it with your customers anytime you need.